sitting here now. Once you're feeling that you're really sitting here now, let us then develop more metta, universal loving kindness for all beings, including yourself and starting from yourself by wishing from your heart, may I be free from anger and fear. May I be free from greed, hatred, and delusion. May I be free from conflict and suffering, dukkha. May I be well, peaceful, and happy. May I be well and happy. May all beings, near and far, be free from conflict and suffering. May all beings, human, animal, the visible and invisible, be well, peaceful, and happy. May all beings in all directions, above, below, in front of me, behind, to my right, to my left, and all around, in all directions, near and far. May all beings be well, peaceful, and happy. some beings satta bhavantu sukhita. Slowly you can open your eyes and get ready to listen to the Dhamma.
Thank you, Bhante. It is now my present task to introduce our speaker, but may I first request, this request comes from the speaker himself, as well as one of our senior members, Anuja Vijayasekara. It was expressed this view that it is nice to see the audience, the gathering here. We have all gathered to the common purpose. So please, if you don't mind, keep your microphones muted, but if you could open the videos, it would be nice to see each other. Now, today's speaker is Don De Silva, who speaks to us from London. Now, Don is a regular speaker of the Servants of the Buddha, but this time we have missed him for some months, and we are very happy to have him back with us today on this very, very timely topic. We are not happy that it's timely, but it is so, on war and conflict. Now, to introduce Don is currently a Buddhist counselor. So he supports and mentors students, the university students, in several units in the United Kingdom, as well as elsewhere. So that's one of his. But Ron is a very busy person in the Buddhist sphere. He speaks regularly on Buddhism. Recently, he launched a book on how Buddhism empowers and sort of what exactly is the title now, how Buddhism empowers
personal and social change.
Personal and social change. And he very generously, all proceeds go to a Buddhist nuns, a monastery for nuns in Sri Lanka. So that is just just a little keyhole view of Don De Silva. But he is formerly he worked in the United Nations Environmental Program. And there he had sort of firsthand, he played a major role in global media strategies, propagating and the sustainability and climate change. And also it was set up various intergovernmental treaties to bring nations together for a common purpose. Of that time, it was battling issues regarding the climate. So now he uses that practical sort of diplomatic, I believe, his experience. So it's not just a theoretical exercise, I believe, when he uses the word navigating through this talk, which is based on how to use Buddhist principles on conflict resolution and in situations of war. So with that, I hand over to Don, and thank you, Don, for giving us your time and your knowledge and sharing it with us today.
Thank you, Professor Sennaika. May I share the screen as I have a slide presentation?
Go ahead, yes.
I think the host has disabled participants' screen sharing. It needs to be enabled.
I will make you, Don,
a co-host.
Co-host. That's the best way of doing it.
Thank you. Oh, brilliant. I've got it now. Wonderful. Can you see my slide presentation now?
Yes, very, very clear.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you. Greetings to all participants and attendees at this very important meeting. It is a very difficult time that we are living at the moment, particularly navigating war and conflict with Buddhist principles. And I would like to thank the servants of the Buddha for hosting this extremely important event in connection with what is happening in the world and at our doorsteps. Most of this presentation is based entirely on the Tipitaka, or what is called the early Buddhist texts, which are authenticated very clearly. And if you want to go further into this, you need to just get hold of Bhikkhu Sujato's and Bhikkhu Brahmali's seminal publication, which is available at the Oxford Centre for Buddhist Studies. Here's what to expect today: a Buddhist perspective on the underlying causes of war and conflict, the far-reaching cost of conflict across various facets of society. We find that these wars and conflicts that are going on are right at our doorsteps. It impacts our pockets, it impacts our pay packets, it impacts our savings. We examine the historical conflicts and schisms that were there during the time of the Buddha and the Sangha, where there were conflicts and also ways of resolving disputes. We go into the select case studies showcasing real-life applications of Buddhist principles in conflict resolution. A case study featuring Thant, the former Secretary General of the United Nations, the crucial role that Buddhists can play in conflict prevention and peace building. The impact of conflict, always and always, the brutal impact of war and conflict always is on two sectors of society: the women and the children. They bear the brunt of conflict, whether it is physical war and conflict, or the conflict of climate change, or what's happening with poverty, or what's happening with global unsustainability. It's the children and the women that suffer the consequences of these conflicts. What's happening now? From the Council of Foreign Relations recently, there are three areas that are happening which we need to pay attention to. An escalation of the war in the Ukraine, resulting from intensified military operations, potentially leading to direct NATO involvement, a protracted war between Hamas and Israel in Gaza, igniting a wider regional conflict involving other Palestinian territories and further clashes between Israel and militant groups in Lebanon and Syria, political polarization in the United States, particularly around and after the 2024 presidential election. Why are there disputes? And this is something that the Buddha dealt with during his time. In the Digha Nikaya, Long Discourses 21, the question was asked from the Buddha, when beings all wish to live in peace, why are they perpetually embroiled in conflict? And the Buddha responded, it is the bonds of envy and miserliness that bind beings so that although they wish to live without hate, hostility, or enmity, and to live in peace, yet they live in hate, harming one another, hostile, and as enemies. Then another question was asked. What gives rise to envy and miserliness? What is their origin? How are they born? How do they arise? When what is present, do they arise? When what is absent, do they not arise? These are very important questions which are even asked now by particularly young people in the world today with dealing with conflict and war around the world. And the Buddha responded in his inimitable way, envy and miserliness arise from liking and disliking. This is their origin. This is how they are born, how they arise. When these are present, they arise. When these are absent, they do not arise. And then the questioner pressed the Buddha further. But sir, what gives rise to liking and disliking? It arises from thinking. When the mind thinks about something, desire arises. When the mind thinks of nothing, desire does not arise. Then the questioner went further. But what gives rise to thinking? Thinking, ruler of the Devas, said the Buddha, arises from elaborate perceptions and notions. This is critical in understanding what's going on at the moment in the world today. When elaborated perceptions and notions are present, thinking arises. When elaborated perceptions and notions are absent, thinking does not arise. And so the interesting thing here in the Tipitaka, and this is why I really respect the reporters or those who passed the Tipitaka down the line, is that they don't edit out the problem areas that were there during particularly the time of the Buddha. And the wonderful thing with the Tipitaka is that it faithfully records even the areas of conflict and problems that were there during the time of the Buddha, which makes it so authentic and interesting. There were areas of disagreement within the Sangha. The most well-known was the attempted time to wrest control of the Sangha by Devadatta, a relative of the Buddha, with the help of King Ajatasattu. There were disagreements about the admission of women into the Sangha and the creation of the Bhikkhuni order, as we shall see later. There were disagreements about the rules of discipline, which the Sangha were obligated to follow, as against we can do what we like. In the Anguttara Nikaya 1037, the Buddha listed some of the areas of concern. Monks explain non-Dhamma as Dhamma and Dhamma as non-Dhamma. Monks explain discipline as non-discipline and non-discipline as discipline. Monks explain what is what has not been stated and uttered by the Tathagata as not having been stated and uttered by him, and what has been stated and uttered by the Tathagata as having been stated and uttered by him. They explain what has not been practiced by the Tathagata as not having been practiced by him. And this comes to the disagreements, the conflict, the differences of opinion between Mahakassapa and Ananda, two of the key disciples during the time of the Buddha. Mahakassapa to the left and Ananda to the right. During their time as disciples and up to the aftermath of the Buddha's passing, the relationships between Mahakassapa and Ananda, two towering figures in the early Sangha, remained fractious. Mahakassapa was weathered by the winds of countless years in austere contemplation, clung tenaciously to the ancient vows he had embraced in his youth. And he believed that the path to enlightenment was paved with ascetic stones. Even in his old age, he declined the invitation of the Buddha to reside with the core leadership, but he was the embodiment of unwavering devotion to the Buddha's teachings. In sharp contrast stood Ananda, the Buddha's Agra Upastayaka, chief assistant, and the Dhamma Bhandagarika, the repository of the Dhamma. Unlike Mahakassapa, Ananda was the epitome of tolerance, compassion, and boundless understanding. According to the Gautami Sutta, his benevolence extended not only to the monks but also to the nuns, laymen, laywomen, the fourfold assembly. Mahakassapa was critical about Ananda's tolerant attitudes towards young, undisciplined monks whose senses were untamed, whose appetite knew no moderation, and Mahakassapa urged Ananda often to take tougher action. But Ananda, ever the bridge between discord and harmony, was not deterred by Mahakassapa's stern words. He once invited Mahakassapa himself to address bhikkhunis in the discourse The Nuns' Quarters, linked discourses 4710. Mahakassapa's words were met with challenging comments from a bhikkhuni named Tullatissa, and this was not a very wise move to invite Mahakassapa to speak to the group of bhikkhunis, because Tullatissa went head on and challenged Mahakassapa's statements. And Mahakassapa did not take this challenge very well, and he issued a warning to Ananda as reported. Hold on, Venerable Ananda. Don't make the Sangha investigate you further, meaning perhaps that there was an investigation that was going on about Ananda. Agame tvam auso Ananda Maha-Thero Sangho uttari uppaparikhi. Ananda was undeterred. He recognized that the preservation and propagation of the Dhamma required a radical change and understanding. And this also led to the critical time when the first Buddhist council was inaugurated following the Buddha's parinibbana. The formation of the first Buddhist council is in this introductory chapter called Bahira Nidana in the Samanta Pasadika, a collection of commentaries which were compiled by Buddhaghosa. Now, what was the factor which called for the immediate convening of the first Buddhist council? There was a sudden jolt to this historical gathering, and it came in the form of Subhadda, a monk late in life, just 7 days after the Buddha's passing, mourned by thousands. Subhadda voiced a different perspective, and in his words in the commentary, "Away with it, friends, grieve not, lament not. We are well rid of the great recluse, the Buddha, who won't tell us what was benefiting and what was not, and hence made our lives miserable. But now we will do whatever we please and not do what we please not." That was the statement of the Buddha that went around like wildfire. So the first council was convened at Rajgir, Bihar in India, next to the Saptapani caves, where the monks resided. And the conference hall at Rajgah was built by none other than King Ajatasattu. It was attended by some 500 Arahant monks. Responding to these statements by Subhadda, Mahakassapa took on the mantle of de facto leader, and then, with the support of King Ajatasattu, organized the council. The council was held over many months, and during the council, the attendees, some of them, expressed their profound dissatisfaction of the role played by Ananda in persuading the Buddha to establish the Bhikkhuni Sangha. However, at the end, the council affirmed the Tipitaka as we know it now. And then something remarkable happened. As the sands of time proceeded and slipped through Mahakassapa's grasp and the embers of his life flickered, he experienced a profound transformation. The austere hermit, the strict disciplinarian, recognized the virtue of tolerance, compassion, and understanding of Ananda's character. In a gesture of profound mindfulness, Mahakassapa passed on the Buddha's alms bowl to Ananda. It was a symbolic bequest, a testament to the preservation of the Dhamma. At that moment, Mahakassapa, the paragon of asceticism, acknowledged Ananda as his spiritual successor, the torchbearer of the Buddha Dhamma. And this was the moment when he handed over the bowl of the Buddha to Ananda and the progress of the Buddha Dhamma after the Parinibbana of the Buddha. The Buddha, as was said in a couple of sessions before in one of the meetings by the Most Venerable Shravasiddhamma, was a very tough individual. He took action very clearly, and the Buddha did not qualm at, wait for, tolerating wrongdoers. And for instance, in the case of, as reported in the numbered discourses 810, he called for the ejection of monks. He was referring to a monk that answered questions evasively, diverted the discussion to irrelevant subjects, and displayed anger, hatred, and resentment. And the Buddha said very clearly, monks, eject this person. Eject this person. This person should be banished. Here, monks, so long as the monks do not see his offense, a certain person who has the same deportment as the good monks, when however they see his offense, they know him as a corruption amongst ascetics. A corruption amongst ascetics. Just chaff and trash amongst ascetics. Then they expel him. For what reason? So that he doesn't corrupt the good monks. That was the tough stand that was taken by the Buddha. And this is a really interesting case study that I came across in the Anguttara Nikaya 820. At one time, the Buddha was staying in the eastern monastery near Savatthi, and the Buddha was expected to speak, but he remained silent. Then Venerable Ananda got up from his seat with palms together, told the Buddha, "Sir, the night is getting late. It is the first watch of the night, and the Sangha has been sitting long. Please, sir, may the Buddha recite the monastic code to the monks." Then the Buddha responds, "Ananda, the assembly is not pure." Venerable Mahamoggallana, who was nearby, wondered whom the Buddha was referring to. Then he focused on comprehending the minds of those present and saw the individual, rotten inside, corrupt and depraved, sitting right in the middle of the Sangha. Venerable Mahamoggallana got up from his seat, went to the monk and said, "Get up, Venerable. The Buddha has seen you. You can't live in communion with the mendicants." But the monk didn't move. Venerable Mahamoggallana repeated his request thrice, but the monk remained. Then Venerable Mahamoggallana took the monk by the arm, and this is quite interesting in this translation at Sutta Central. The monk took the Venerable Mahamoggallana took the monk by the arm. And you need to understand the fact that the Buddha and those who came from the Shakyan kingdom, like Venerable Mahamoggallana, people That's why Mahamoggallana was called Mahamoggallana. He was pretty tall, and they would have definitely have had military training. Mahamoggallana took the monk, maybe he would have grabbed him from both the arm and the scruff of his neck, ejected him out of the gate, and bolted the door. He returned, went to the Buddha and said, I have ejected that person. The assembly is pure. And the Buddha responded, it is incredible, Moggallana. It is amazing how that foolish man waited to be taken by the arm. So, in many ways, the Buddha was not just only about resolving things in a peaceful and calm manner. There were times when corruption was physically attended to. We move now to this incredible statecraft of the Buddha. The Buddha addressed governance issues with daring and precision. For a samana, a renunciant, he engaged with rulers of his time. And this is really important when navigating war and conflict as we deal with it now, and promoted ideals to improve spiritual, mental health, well-being of people in society. Buddha didn't shy away from engaging with issues in society. He directly involved himself with what was going on now, particularly with the rulers of his time, even to the time of when he was 80. There were those, if you read the Mahaparinibbana Sutta, you will find that even at that time, which we will look into later, the Buddha dealt with emissaries of kings about disagreements, wars, and conflicts. So there was a real clear engagement by the Buddha, even during the latter periods of his years. And so it is with the situations that he had to deal with the two major states during his time. You see that the Sakya kingdom is a small kingdom in the north near the Himalayas, and then you have Kosala to your left and Magadha to your right. Kosala and Magadha were always on conflict situations during the time of the Buddha, and he had to work very hard to keep them apart at times. Sometimes he succeeded, sometimes he didn't. But in the Mahaparinibbana Sutta, Ajatasattu, the king of Magadha, told his minister Vasakkara to go to the Buddha and say he wanted to invade the Vajjis. And this is a very interesting way in which the Buddha dealt with presenting the middle way in a conflict. This is a master class in diplomacy. Ananda was also present at this discussion. The Buddha then responded to Vasakkara, the minister, by praising the Vajjis and saying that the Vajjis were growing, they had economic growth, and the society was not in decline, pointing out that it would have been not good tactics for Ajatasattu and the Magadha kingdom to invade the Kosala kingdom, because the Kosalans would have been ready to meet the Magadhan armies if they came over. Vasakara got the message and said, King Ajatasattu cannot defeat the Vajjis in war unless by bribery or by serving dissent. And he went away. And the Buddha also was pretty direct in his descriptions of corruption and its impact on society. And he went like this: at a time when kings are corrupt, royal officials become corrupt. When royal officials are corrupt, Brahmins and householders become corrupt. And down the line this goes to the impact that it has on ordinary people. As we have seen before, it was nothing different then, where the ordinary people suffer from corruption. And he talks about crops and the impact of corruption on food and the provision of food. And in the same way, the flip side being that when kings are principled, royal officials become principled, Brahmins and householders, peoples of town and country become principled. When the people of town and country are principled, the courses of the sun and the moon become regular. This is very much as if though our actions also have cosmic consequences. The seasons and years become regular. The blowing of the winds become regular and ordinary. And the deities are not angered. The heavens provide plenty of rain. So you have the cosmic consequences which the Buddha outlined in terms of action of people. And we move to this very interesting case study for our times, the Rohini River conflict, which the Buddha directly engaged with. The Rohini River, which is present now in the Shure or the Sivalik hills in Kapilavastu, in Nepal's Lumbini zone. The Sakyans and the Kolyans were both part of a common clan, but their traditional occupation was agriculture. And the Rohini River brought water from the Himalayas and irrigated the lands of both states. Initially, the population in both the Sakyan and the Kolyan states was low. The water of the Rohini was adequate for their farms. However, with the passage of time, just as it is happening now in the world with environmental conflicts, the surrounding forest lands were converted into agricultural land to meet with increasing needs of the growing population. And the river waters was no longer sufficient to meet with the increased demand. The scarcity of water became a cause of conflict between the two republics. People on both sides of the river bank blamed each other for taking excessive water from the river, a standard factor in shared natural resources right across the world today. And what might be also happening between Russia and Ukraine concerning the Crimea. And this was the first recorded environmental conflict with the armies of the Shakyans and the Kolyans on either side of the river. Hostilities broke out. When the Buddha heard about the outbreak of hostility, he went there himself. He didn't run away from conflict. On seeing the Buddha, warriors on both sides laid down their weapons and paid homage to him. The Buddha took the seat prepared for him on the open ground of the riverbank. And the Buddha then explained to both armies that their blood was much more than the river water. That their blood was much more than the river water. That they should not spill blood unnecessarily. Instead, that they should find a way to share the water peacefully. And the armies agreed, and war was averted as a result. We now go on from the Tipitaka to a slightly later time concerning the time of the great Emperor Asoka. And this information is taken from this wonderful study called King Asoka and Buddhism, which is a publication of the Buddhist Publication Society, and you can download this with the link that is there on your screens. The drums of war thundered as Emperor Asoka prepared to unleash his wrath upon the defiant state of Kalinga in southern ancient India. And Kalinga was a thorn in the flesh of the Mauryan Empire. Asoka's grandfather, Chandragupta, had previously attempted to conquer Kalinga but had been repulsed. And here he unleashed Emperor Asoka, his most ferocious and brutal attack. A hurricane of violence and destruction that would shake the very foundations of his own heart and mind. Rock Edict 13 contains the statement by Emperor Asoka, where he himself describes the battlefield which bore witness to the carnage that followed as men and animals alike were swept away by the might of his armies. Some 150,000 people were torn from their homes, their lives forever altered. 100,000 more met their end in the relentless dance of battle, and the countless others perished in its wake. And this is an artistic impression of the battle of Kalinga, which Emperor or Samrat Asoka was involved with. And then came this extraordinary transformation that happened with Emperor Asoka. And Rock Edict 13 reports on this. The country of Kalingas was conquered. But now that the country of the Kalingas had been conquered, the beloved of the gods, that Samrat Asoka is devoted to an intense practice of the duties relating to the Dhamma, longing for the Dharma and inculcation of Dharma among the people. This is due to the repentance of the beloved of the gods on having conquered the country of the Kalingas. Verily, the slaughter, death, and deportation of men which took place in the course of the conquest of an unconquered country are now considered extremely painful and deplorable by the beloved of the gods. And this is the Rock Edict 13. It was a lamentation, a cry of anguish for the suffering he had inflicted upon the world. And the transformation marked the birth of a new Asoka, a Dhamma Asoka, a ruler guided by the principles of the Dhamma. And H.G. Wells, in his book, The Outline of History, says, amidst tens of thousands of names of monarchs that crowd the columns of history, their majesties and graciousnesses and serenities and royal highnesses and the like, the name of Asoka shines, and shines alone a star. And so Emperor Asoka writes in Edict 13, and this record relating to Dhamma has been written on stone for the following purpose: that my sons and great-grandsons should not think of a fresh conquest by arms as worth achieving, that they should adopt a policy of forbearance and light punishment towards the vanquished, even if they conquer a people by arms, that they should regard the conquest through Dharma as the conquest, as the true conquest, and such a conquest brings happiness to all concerned, both in this world and the next. And Pillar Edict 7 gives this advice to rulers, and this is important for the rulers and the heads of state today. It is by persuasion that progress amongst the people through Dhamma has had a greater effect in respect of harmlessness to living beings and non-killing of living beings. And under his leadership, death penalty was abolished, welfare of animals became a state concern, medical facilities for both animals and people, Dhamma Mahamattas, officers to work for the welfare and happiness of the poor and the aged, generosity towards priests and ascetics, and the frugality in spending, and so on, and the impact of peace on society. And so we have the Dhammic diplomacy, where we relate the experiences of Samrat Asoka to what is happening in the world today. And Emperor Asoka's diplomatic paradigm holds critical relevance for what is going on at the world today. Emperor Asoka sent missionaries abroad to various parts of the world, and particularly to Sri Lanka. The Samantha Prasadika's background and narrative tells how Moggaliputta Thero sent out 9 Buddhist missions to spread Buddhism, and one of them was, and the key mission was to Sri Lanka, where he sent Mahinda, his son, and Sanghamitta, his daughter, both brilliant emissaries of the emperor. To Sri Lanka came, along with Mahinda, Itya, Uttiya, Sambala, and Bhaddasala. And the tradition adds that during his 19th regnal year, this is path-breaking for world history. For the first time, a woman representative of an emperor, Asoka's daughter Sanghamitta, went to Sri Lanka to establish an order of nuns taking a sapling of the Bodhi tree with her. Sanghametta, world stateswoman, unparalleled in human history. Deep in the annals of world history, a figure of steely determination, selflessness, spiritual focus and action emerges, providing an example of unusual leadership for the world. Sanghametta, friend of the Sangha, together with a group of bhikkhunis, shattered many glass ceilings, and their arrival was a result of Dhammic diplomacy between two rulers, an emperor, Asoka, and Devanampiyatissa, king of Sri Lanka. And the visionary 12, the young people who came in peace to promote the Dhamma, who left everything that they had to promote the Dhamma in the state of extraordinary sacrifice to promote the Dhamma in a faraway foreign land. The bhikkhunis who appointed Sanghametta on their journey, not often talked about. Uttara, Vichakkana, Hema, Pasadapala, Agamitta, Dasika, Peggu, Pabbata, Matta, Malla, and Dhammadasya. I sincerely hope that today people talk about these individuals in their in schools and colleges and get to know them and find out what they did. Dhara Bhikkhuniyo, this young bhikkhunis came hither from Jambudvipa, says Dipavamsa in chapter 13. The leadership of Sanghametta and her group of nuns gave up riches to serve in another land. And then the unique establishment of the first known international women's order, the Bhikkhuni Sangha, in another country. There were pundits and scholars, says the Dipavamsa. They taught the Vinaya, says, Vinaya Pitaka, says the Dipavamsa, in Anuradhapura. And the interesting thing is that from the arrival of Sanghametta, which is dated around 245 BCE, to the time of King Bhattika Abhaya in his era, there were 16,000 bhikkhuni leaders in Sri Lanka. Within 223 years. How is that for cost effectiveness? From a purely business entrepreneurial way, done in a voluntary manner, without any salary or payment or employment. From the time of Emperor Asoka, we moved to the present day with Thant, the Secretary General of the third Secretary General of the United Nations, a master class in meditative diplomacy. So can Dhammic diplomacy be applied? Let's see. In the annals of human history, some individuals leave a clear footprint on the canvas of human civilization, but the work of Thant is not talked about much. He hailed from a small town in Burma and made a valuable contribution to world peace during the time of the Cuban Missile Crisis. Thant's morning ritual was a testament to his nature, and the New York Times writes, each morning after rising at 6:30, U Thant of Burma, Secretary General of the United Nations, performs a Buddhist rite. He sits quiet alone and meditates, and in those minutes, perhaps 5 or 10, Thant makes no offering to the Buddha, nor does he kneel in prayer. Instead, he quietly yet actively strives to attain what he calls humbly emotional equilibrium. And just a year into his appointment was the most testing time for U Thant when the missile crisis in Cuba broke out. And suddenly, as it is today, the entire world was placed on an edge of nuclear abyss because of the dance between the US and, at that time, what was called the USSR. It was here that the Burmese diplomat demonstrated his mettle, and he was called by President Kennedy to help and intervene. And so negotiations ensued between President Kennedy, the leader of the Soviet Union, Nikita Khrushchev, and, of course, Fidel Castro in Cuba. And U Thant found the middle ground, jana, as the Buddha called it, the middle path between two superpowers and Cuba, preventing the world from plummeting into nuclear war. He was able to diffuse a nuclear standoff still considered the most dangerous in human history. And here you have the examples of what happened during that time. Then also U Thant did one interesting thing which the world doesn't talk about, which is his action to respond to environmental protests in the late 1960s. He called for the holding of the United Nations Conference on the Human Environment, 1972. And that was a watershed in world history. And it was there that the United Nations Environment Programme was formed, a milestone in global environmental policymaking and action. So in each of these instances of Dhammic diplomacy stands out in history a process through practical, effective, compassionate means, marking a stark contrast to conquest, crusades, colonial subjugations causing immense suffering. Buddhism demonstrates that the middle way is the most effective way for foreign relations throughout the world. Can Dhammic diplomacy work today? Palki Sharma, one of India's leading journalists, at an Oxford Union debate in 2023 says, Modi's India is on the right path. And she said, this government, relating to India, has aced what we call Buddhist diplomacy. I'm just giving you just a modern statement about Dhammic diplomacy or Buddhist diplomacy. So, to conclude, all what I have said is in this book that has been written, How Buddhism Empowers Personal and Social Change. And I would like to end by pointing out that the Buddhist Buddha Dhamma has an extraordinary set of examples to provide to the world on how we can extend and navigate the current conflicts that are happening in the world today in a unique and unparalleled manner that would be beneficial for the whole of humankind. I'd like to thank you, and I'd like to thank the servants of the Buddha for giving me the opportunity to present this. Over to you, Dr. Selnaik.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Don, for that fascinating and spellbinding presentation. There was hushed silence, and as you said about how the stars and how nature can also, that rumbling thunder that was menacing, and just you also was silenced. It's completely gone away, and there is no threat of any thunderstorm. Thank you, Don. And that was fascinating. And it took me back to hearing that Uposatha Sutta, how Mahamogallana took by the arm, which you mentioned once under your talk on corruption. And Thant and the many, what is called, was it like bylaws or those statements that he had brought into some sort of convention, the UN convention, was mentioned at this forum once by George Cook, who was full of praise and for that. And it goes without saying that U Thant deserves a lot of praise as a Buddhist UN General Secretary, and the only Buddhist UN General Secretary we've had so far. So thank you for all that. And it's really fascinating. Let's open the floor for comments and questions. And thank you once again, Don. And Venerable Sir, would you like to start with some comment or question, Bhante?
Well, comment means it's amazing how many facts and figures and personalities in the Tipitaka you have been able to get involved in this talk also, and very, very interesting. And the other thing is the illustrations, the art which you have been able to collect is extraordinary, beautifully done. I think maybe with AI, if I can recognize it, and very, very well done. So I want to just make a compliment on your beautiful talk on that's engaged Buddhism, environmental engaged Buddhism, and under the present horrific, dangerous situations, also with an election coming up in the United States as well. You know, like the world is at a very dangerous sort of state. And well, it's only the people who can really make a change, and not only the people, also the diplomats or the people in the government. If they could change, usually they're more interested in their own business. So there's quite a lot of things to be changed. On the other hand, there's also kind of increasing voice of democratic and also younger people, especially on the what you call the environmental and also the war situations. But whether it is really working, some people say it is almost too late, but still one can try. Thank you.
Thank you, Bhante. The ruthlessness and brutality that is seen today, and as Don mentioned, President John Kennedy invited Thant. Do we see such any of the leaders inviting a third party? to come in? No, there is more hatred, is more and more hatred, isn't it?
Yes,
And John F. Kennedy was killed.
Yes, the interesting thing, and I've taken time to study what happened with Thant. Of course, the interesting thing with every person whom I talked to, my boss at the United Nations Environment Program was Maurice Strong, who interacted quite a bit with Thant. You have to also realize that Thant was in many ways a charismatic figure. And he had a presence, might have been as a result of his times of meditation. But my boss often used to comment on how he often noticed the presence of Thant and the way he carried himself. And I think it was Thant's quiet diplomacy and the way he handled it that enabled the three contentious leaders at the time, John Kennedy, Khrushchev, and then Fidel Castro, and it was not easy to navigate between the three. If you have seen Fidel Castro in action, in particular, and fortunately for the world, he succeeded in finding the middle ground. And that gives hope in many ways to point out that whilst there is negativity and the fact of a sense of helplessness, there are things that can be done that are positive, and this, I think, is what Buddhism can offer to the world, that there is a third way out, a middle way out. Marjena Tathagata Dhammam, they say. That is, the Tathagata teaches the Dhamma by the middle.
Even I was just thinking about Aung San Suu Kyi, even though she is in jail, she is a kind of a force to be reckoned with. And the vast majority of the Burmese people are still supporting her. And she is still influencing what's happening. Although the big generals are so powerful, she cannot really win that part, but she still influences the mentality of the people.
It is possible, in my experience, although these have not been maybe impactful as far as the world is concerned, except, of course, that we were able to get the governments to come together to agree on a global climate action program. That was a positive thing, and that is ongoing every year now. But there have been times when I have seen even now conflicting countries that are now going hammer and tongs at each other. I have seen them around tables agreeing on environmental treaties and thinking about the future of the children and taking action. In the case of Sri Lanka, during the early 1980s, we were able to bring 8 countries in the South Asian region together to form the first ever intergovernmental body, the South Asia Cooperative Environmental Program. Together, the headquarters is in Colombo. It is limping along, but it still limps and goes along.
Mm-hmm.
And so I realize that despite the hostilities that are there, people can find ways in which we can all come together. And this is, for me, the beauty of the teachings of the Buddha Dhamma and the Buddha's middle way. When Mahakachana came and said to him in this famous Kachanagata Sutta, which I love. He said, they say, what is the right view? Bahante Bucchati. And the Buddha said, Sabbam Atti. All exists, that is one way. Sabbam Natti. All does not exist, that is the Patama Anto, second alternative. But etete kachna ubanto anupagamma majjena tatagato dhammam deseti. This is where the Buddha goes in the middle and deals with duality. This process of duality which has wrecked the world right up to now and goes on doing that. The Buddha found the middle way of being able to deal with issues. Majjena tathagato dhammam deseti. So we have in Buddhism and as followers of the Tipitaka, we have some wonderful experiences and examples that we can work hard to promote in the world. It is our task, because the Buddha talked about when the Buddha outlined his vision to the world, what did he say? Bahu jana hithaya, bahu jana sukhaya, loka anucompaya, loka anucompaya, but for the welfare and happiness of humankind and for the compassion of the world. That is the role of a Buddhist in the world today. That was the vision that the Buddha gave to any Buddhist. Bahujana hithaya, bahujana sukhaya, loka anucompaya. Any other questions from any of the other attendees?
Manuri. Hello, Manuri.
Yes,
Yeah,
Mahendra.
yes, sir. Go
Go
ahead.
ahead, Mahendra, please.
Thank you. Well, firstly, just to congratulate Don on a masterly presentation. He covered so much ground, he gave so much references, and he spoke with passion. So very, very impressive. Thank you very much. But as always, the question is one of how rather than what is needed. We know what is needed. There are two doors which we are knocking at. One is if you fit the key and open it, you'll go into a terrible war. Other one, peaceful. If you open that door, you go to have peace. There are many keys available, and trouble is the people in charge of who's using the key are the world leaders, and their own agendas are different from maybe what we are thinking of. But I still have hope that world leaders can be influenced by mass protests and movements and discussion and power of media, etc., so that they'll ultimately realize that they cannot ignore what the masses are saying to them, and they must take action. But sometimes what we require is some kind of escape mechanism. For example, I was told that one of the reasons why Kennedy and Khrushchev agreed to that deal was that Khrushchev had to agree with Kennedy that for 6 months or something, the impression had to be that he was the prime mover of saying, okay, if you keep on with the missiles, we will attack. And Khrushchev had to say, okay, I won't do it. But behind the deals, the fact that Khrushchev agreed to that was not made public. It was made, the public was made to feel that Kennedy was the man, and it gave him importance. Later on, only the Khrushchev's responses was also articulated, and I think people still feel wrongly, I think, that just Kennedy. I think Khrushchev also has to be congratulated on having a Madhyama solution to that. And of course, engineered by Thant, no doubt about that. So you need somebody who has honest intentions, long-term vision, devoid of selfishness, love for people, humanity, to come forward in Gaza and Ukraine. I mean, Ukraine should never have happened in the first place if the West recognized that Ukraine poses even maybe theoretically an existential threat to Russia because of its close proximity, and told them, for heaven's sake, I know you are a state by yourself, you have right to decide what you want to do, but just say that you are not going to join NATO. We will be just on our own. I don't think it would ever happen. So that kind of compromise hasn't happened. And today, who's suffering? As you said quite rightly, millions of innocent people, children, women, and other people. I sometimes find it very hard to imagine that we are living in a civilized society where we sort differences out by killing each other. Who's making money? Arms manufacturers, politicians. It's really sad. Now, the Buddhist method you advocated, Don, is absolutely sensible and is the right thing to do. The question is, the medicine is there. How do we administer it? That is the problem that I'm struggling with, and I don't know. I don't have an answer. I hope there'll be some third party who will come and mediate and get people to talk, because ultimately that's what it will solve. I mean, Russia is not going to destroy Ukraine. Ukraine is not going to destroy. Israel will always try to annex Gaza and have a Palestinian, and not like a Palestinian state to arise. They want to feel safe, and they'll claim everything as their territory, rightfully so. So they say. So I don't know how to resolve it, but there's no doubt that the Buddhist principles that you very clearly enunciated, Don, are a way forward if only the medicine will be taken by somebody. Thank you.
Hello, this is Darini. Can I make an
Yes,
intervention?
Please.
Yes,
Yeah,
why don't
thank you.
Also, Darini, why don't you also switch on the video so that we see?
Okay. Can I just talk without
Okay.
doing that right now?
Okay.
Thanks. Thank you for a fascinating and inspiring presentation. I just wanted to say that there is now a broad consensus that there's a global power shift from the west to the east, from the north to the south that's happening. And for most of human history, Asia led the world in terms of ideas, knowledge, technology, etc. And of course, the great world religions all came from Asia. And for the last 200 years, maybe the West dominated. But now this power, the power is shifting back to Asia. And that's why there's a great deal of global turbulence and the wars that we are seeing, because an empire doesn't like to give up power and willingly. So this is what we are seeing, various conflicts emerge. But I guess in Buddhism, we also have this idea of the long duration pattern, the long historical trajectories, and that is here also being played out again. So this has been called, the 21st century is also called the Asian 21st century, because power is shifting back to Asia, which is actually quite dominated by Buddhist values, the understanding of, that you play a long game, a long distance look at history, and because of karmic ideas of rebirth and all of that. So maybe we can also be positive. I mean, this is a dark period, but maybe in the long run, this power shift is happening, and it might be for the good. It's a little ironic that U Thant's own country, Burma, is in the midst of all this conflict, and Buddhism and all the religions were weaponized during the Cold War to divide and rule during colonialism. And that's also ongoing right now, because of course Burma is on China's border. So just like Ukraine is on Russia's border. So again, all of these conflicts have to do with the whole sort of militarization of the world that has come from a particular part of the world, which is also partly a big reason for the environmental crisis, because the military business industrial complex is the biggest generator of carbon emissions and pollution, but that's rarely talked about in the UN and other conferences and amongst the protesters. So we also live with a lot of misinformation, and again the Buddhist notion of the right view and educating ourselves, understanding and behaving with restraint, the middle path is of course really quite relevant. So I just thought I'll throw those ideas out there, and thank you for the presentation.
Thank you, Dharini. Don, do you want to respond, or anybody? Yes, Anuja.
Just to say, Don, that was an absolutely excellent talk and very inspiring. So thank you very much for that presentation. I wish the world leaders could have listened to you today, and hopefully something might have penetrated. Now, referring to the example of the Cuban crisis, there was a book written called The 13 Days. That was the period of time when Kennedy was in the throes of this, and then all the discussions that took place within the group of people who were trying to resolve this in the US. That's all explained in that book. Now, the thing is, Kennedy was receptive to Thant's advocacy for the middle way. Kennedy had the vision and the intelligence to respond to that call. And I'd like to say that Kennedy was actually ahead of his time, and certainly in his own country of the United States, he was far ahead in terms of his thinking. Because at the end of that period, when the crisis was resolved, Kennedy was branded as a communist because he agreed with Khrushchev and brought the crisis to an end. So he was branded as a communist, and he paid with his life for his far-thinking and enlightened approach to conflict resolution. So unfortunately, we have not had leaders of that caliber since then. So that's the reality of the situation. But I'd like to thank Dharini for bringing it to our attention, the fact that the global order is changing, and hopefully in the long term, some of these Buddhist principles which have been the basis for the great civilizations of Asia would emerge. But I fear to say that in the short run, I don't see such a thing emerging unless we have a leader of the same vision as John F. Kennedy.
Thank you, Anuja. If there are no other
Can I
questions.
just give a few bits of information responding to the comments made? Just a tiny little bit of information. There is a book that will be coming out, which will contain all the negotiations information concerning Thant. That is being written, I believe, by his grandson Umint. I think he's working on it, and it will be something very interesting to look forward to. Change in terms of leadership is possible when you look at the likes of Mandela, who was in prison for 27 years, but came out of prison and decided to forgive his jailers and those who put him in jail and kept him in prison. That was an extraordinary example of leadership, as a result of which bloodshed in South Africa was averted and revenge was averted. So you have examples, and we do have this extraordinary, the critical element is also to thank Dharani for her comments, very well taken. The critical thing is, what are the responsibilities of those of us who follow the path of the Buddha Dhamma? We have a precious teaching. We have a precious teaching which can be applied to all facets of society and to current critical existential threats that are going on. And it is critical that we put across these lessons that we have in the Buddha Dhamma, to teach to the students, to teach those in schools, in colleges, to discuss these issues further in temples and places, and to see what can be done, particularly throughout the Buddhist world and beyond. And we need to have that facility in order to do it, so that we move and provide a middle way forward for people, rather than to be in states, moving to states of despair. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, I think, excellent summing up, Don, and a nice note to end on. Shall we, time is, now we have gone past time, but that has been a very wonderful, absolutely fantastic session. Thank you very much once again, Don, for presenting that to us, for all the hard work and preparation, and for, bringing up so many, and to all those who participated, those who contributed with your thoughts or comments, very useful. Shall we then end in the usual way by transferring merit to the devas, the departed, and to wishing all beings to be well and peaceful and happy. Bhante, could you give us the usual stanzas, please, Bhante?
Yes, and I'd like to just say something which takes 5 seconds.
Yes,
That is,
Bhante.
I happen to be in South Africa, in Somerset West, giving a meditation long weekend, exactly at the time that Nelson Mandela came out of jail. The owner of the house said, look at this, the best news for a long time, with a newspaper in his hand. It was so moving. Akasattha Chibhumatta Devanaga Mahindika Punyang Tang Anumoditva Chirang Rakhantu Loka Sasanang Akasattha Chibhumatta Devanaga Mahindika Punyang Tang Anumoditva Chirang Rakhantu Desanang Akasattha Chibhumatta Devanaga Mahindika Punyang tang anumoditva chirang rakhantu mang paranti ettavata chamhi sampatang punya sampadang samde deva anumodantu sabba sampatti siddhya ettavata chamhi sampatang punya sampadang sabbe bhuta anumodantu sabba sampatti siddhya Ettavata chamhi sampatang punya sampadang sambe satta anumodantu sabba sampatti siddhya idang me nyati nang hotu sukita hontu nyati ho Idang me nyati nang hotu sukhita hontu nyatayo. Idang wo nyati nang hotu sukhita hontu nyatayo.
Sadhu, sadhu. Thank you very much, Bhante, Don, Anuja, and everyone else who joined. Mahendra, Darini, for your valuable comments and inputs. So we will end. Let me just remind that next week we have the last words of the Buddha. Appamadena Sampadeta is the topic by Mr. Das Miriagal. And the following week is another very interesting topic. It's on Buddhist art from the 2nd century BC, in the classical period, 2nd century BC to about the 13th century of the Common Era, by Professor Chandani Vanigatunga, who is I'm so proud to say she's a medical doctor, pharmacologist. So don't miss out on those 2 sessions. Thank you, everyone, and let's hope till we meet again, we hope that good sense and peace will prevail. May all be well and happy. I will end the meeting. Thank you.